Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 9th, and this is the Kubernetes SIG Testing bi-weekly meeting. I am your host, Aaron Krickenberger, aka Aaron of SIGBeard, aka SpiffXP on all the places. We adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct in this meeting, which basically means we be our very best selves and don't be jerks to each other. If you have a problem with the conduct of this meeting, please email conduct@kubernetes.io, or you are free to reach out to me privately. This meeting is being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube later. So let's see here. First up, I feel like I recognize most of the names here, but is anybody new to this meeting? Do you want to introduce yourselves? Say a little bit about why you're here? Okay, cool. Well, on today's agenda, we're going to have Ben and Amit talk about some KEPs that we are proposing for this release cycle. And then I was going to talk a little bit about the work remaining to be done to close out the Kubernetes CI policy work for like all release blocking jobs running on community infrastructure. And then if we have time, I'm happy to talk about some of the lessons I learned while trying to rename the Kubernetes org repo's default branch to main, and some of the work we could use your help with to make this transition easier for the other 150 something repos we have in the project. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Ben, but I will give him co-host access so he can share his screen if he would like. Take it away, Ben. We can't hear you at the moment. Like Zoom shows you as unmuted, but we hear nothing, or at least I hear nothing.
Same over here. I saw his yellow outline light up quickly.
Now we can see you. Okay, I'll tell you what. How about we switch off to Amit to talk about the KEP on using.
Does this work?
Oh, we got Ben. Okay.
I switched my. I don't. For some reason, Zoom's web client seems to not be able to handle my headset. I have no idea. Yeah, so I think I'm actually probably not going to screen share because I think like screen sharing text KEPs is probably a little bit counterproductive. But I'm going to drop a link, and I'll sort of do a quick overview. So the bulk of the KEP is here. This is also linked in the doc, which may be a little bit, the doc for this meeting, which may be a little bit easier. So the gist of this is, at some point in the past, we introduced the Bazel build system to Kubernetes. The reason for this was we wanted more hermetic builds that are like isolated from external infrastructure and reproducible. We wanted builds with good caching. At the time, Go didn't have any caching yet, and Kubernetes is a really large build. We're doing it over and over and over in CI. Just, okay, this will be great. So a few of our SIG testing members in particular put a lot of time into this. It got to a pretty good place, but it has some developer friction, and it never quite shipped a release. We ran into some issues around CGO in particular with the Go integration. And at this point, I think the community has pretty well decided that we're not interested in pursuing this further. It's gone on for years and hasn't gotten traction as what we're switching to. So rather than continue to maintain two build systems in parallel, I'm proposing to spin down the Bazel build system and continue using the make one that we actually ship our releases with. We've also run into some issues in the past with things like slightly different configuration in the build and test. So for example, at one point we were shipping releases that didn't actually have SE Linux enabled properly. even though our tests were passing in CI because they were using the like Bazel build that did have it on correctly. So that's pretty much the idea. The KEP goes into some more detail about how we're going to migrate, but it is pretty much what you'd expect. We're going to start with the most critical jobs like Kubernetes blocking pre-submit testing and migrate them one by one. And we've done some pre-work to check things that, like, for example, the unit tests, which were one of the things that benefited the most from switching to the caching, actually run pretty acceptably today. And we're doing some more work around that just in general because the test should be faster. And we have some future work we could potentially do to do things like improve the make system to be a little bit less terrible. But for the most part, it functions. It has shipped our releases for a long time. And I believe it's what most contributors are using. And that's Bobby coming over to squeak. Let's see if I can say hello, Bobby. Yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments?
What's the story? Let's see. So I understand the scope of this KEP. We're talking about doing this exclusively for the currently developed version of Kubernetes, right?
Yes, and I should also have been clear up front. This is exclusively for the Kubernetes core repo as well. We're not trying to, declare how subprojects should handle their builds. We might provide input or guidance, but that's their decision. We're only trying to reduce the maintenance load on the main Kubernetes repo, which has quite a lot of work ongoing into its build systems to do things like Go upgrades. They're surprisingly more involved than you might hope. Potentially, depending on the friction with maintaining the ongoing release branches, we might cherry pick this back. But in general, I think we try to avoid sweeping changes to branches that have already had a release cut. And we're fairly hopeful that logically it should actually cherry pick just fine. It will actually have less conflicts. You'll just need to generate any of the build changes on the previous branch, but you won't need to generate them on top of some cherry pick back change. So hopefully it will actually be one of the smoothest routes to just do this to the master or the primary development branch and then age this out over time. We also don't do a lot of the build maintenance like Go upgrades very often in the release branches. We mostly freeze the tooling at once we release. So we get most of the benefit from doing this in the ongoing development branch.
Okay, any questions, comments, or concerns for Ben? All right, thanks a bunch for your time, Ben. Appreciate it. Next up, Amit is going to talk to us a little bit about using kubetest2 for the release blocking and merge blocking jobs for Kubernetes.
Yeah, I'll start along the same vein and drop a link to the KEP in the chat. A quick refresher to folks who don't know what kubetest2 is. Last year we started this effort called kubetest2, which is basically an extension of kubetest. And the reason we did that is kubetest has sort of grown like this organic tool with a bunch of hacks here and there, and making changes to it is fairly brittle. And it means that if something goes wrong, all CI jobs end up breaking. And so we have this sort of good separation of concerns in kubetest2, where the deployers are separate binaries and the testers themselves are also separate binaries, which gives us a lot of control over how we can change specific jobs and keep the scope keep the scope of the change fairly limited. So this KEP basically talks about starting to move some of the jobs from kubetest to kubetest2. we've had a lot of progress in most of the common deployers that are being used in jobs today. The biggest one, which is the GC cluster up deployer. And we already have a bunch of periodic jobs that are canary jobs trying to mimic what we do existing with kube test jobs. And we've seen good progress there. So we probably want to start migrating some of the existing Kubernetes pre-submit blocking and release blocking jobs to kubetest 2 and see. That way we get deprecation of most of the things that we've said will deprecate, like scenarios and Bootstrap. So this effort sort of tracks all of these in one place. We specifically are talking about pre-submit blocking and release blocking in this cap because there are, like, from some numbers there are more than 1700 end-to-end jobs running, and we definitely don't want to be switching over them all at once. So this will be sort of a job by job basis of migration. So we've chosen this subset of jobs that we can monitor closely, but we'll also be working on a guide that will let other folks sort of migrate their jobs on their own, monitor, and we'll basically document what exactly needs to change for a job to use kubetest 2 instead of kubetest. Yeah, and the basic details are there in the cap. We'll just migrate it job by job, and we won't, like similar to the Bazel cap, we won't really be making any changes to existing release branches because they, like, affecting their release signal is something that we don't want to do, and they already have jobs using kubetest running, so we'll just let them age out, sort of. Yeah, any questions? I see
Have
everyone.
we thought a bit about how we might break up this effort? This seems like it's going to touch on a lot of people's CI if we can ideally get everything migrated. This kind of feels like the scope of, say, the CI and efforts that Aaron started earlier or at the end of last year.
Yeah, we'll definitely need a bunch of folks collaborating on this, especially CI signal and SIG testing, also SIG release. But mainly we'll probably have, just to start with, we'll probably have duplicate jobs so that the existing jobs will still be there to still have the old signal while we are trying to get new jobs in place. And once we do the switchover, we'll still keep the old jobs as optional. That way, if something is failing on, say, a PR, folks can still run the old job and get the same signal. Yeah, and we'll have like tracking dashboards, test grid dashboards. We already have a dashboard called pre-submit non-blocking, which has a couple of canary jobs already there. And that seems like a good place to have these jobs that will shadow the existing kubetest jobs.
Well, I have one question. What is the relation with the Bootstrap.py and the Podutils thing? Because it's in the cap.
Yeah, so the reason I put there in the cap is kubetest 2 jobs by default don't need Bootstrap. So if you remember, one of the efforts that we were trying to do is move away from Bootstrap to use Podutils, which is sort of the new way of writing Prow jobs. And one of the reasons we couldn't just do that is kubetest and the Kubernetes E2E scenario specifically depended on Bootstrap a lot. And the reason, and since kubetest 2 doesn't have any dependency with Bootstrap, we get that migration for free, at least for the subset of jobs that we are trying to migrate. So with sort of 2 birds in 1 stone, we get migration for Bootstrap to Podutils and from kubetest to kubetest 2, and also deprecate scenarios.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I've got another sort of thing related to that on just migration from Podutils to Bootstrap. I opened up sort of an umbrella issue to cover that. I feel like I also kind of want to subtly shift Amit's wording there. Like Podutils have been the way to write proud jobs for at least a year and a half. That's when we marked bootstrap.py as unsupported by test infra on call. And it was marked as deprecated for a couple of years prior, if I remember correctly. So I want to give a shout out to Ricardo Katz and Dims, who Dims sort of put together a guide on how to migrate from Bootstrap to Podutils. And Ricardo went through this exercise for the Node E2E pre-submit. We could use some helps if folks want to sort of take what Dims wrote and take it out of his gist and put it somewhere that's more accessible for the community. It also wouldn't be that hard to write some like tests or something that help us survey like which jobs don't use Podutils right now. So we just sort of get kind of an upper bound of like how many jobs are there to migrate, and we could start identifying like which SIGs own which jobs. And this sort of stuff can then be leveraged to help us keep track of outside of the release blocking and merge blocking jobs, what other jobs are not using kubetest 2, so we can make sure that down the line, those SIGs get those jobs migrated as well. Any other questions? Okay, I guess I had one last question. Arnaud, I think as a tech lead for SIG release, did y'all talk about this in the SIG release meeting this morning? I know I didn't have time to attend, but Sasha made it sound like y'all chatted about this a bit.
No, we skipped the subject because you were not there. So I think maybe next time.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, unfortunately, like I have a standing conflict with that time, but I'll see if I can cut it short one of these days. Okay. So I guess next up, I wanted to talk about kind of wrapping up the CI policy work for the release blocking jobs that we started back in August. So I'm going to be doing a lot of talking here. I would appreciate it if somebody wants to take notes in case I say stuff that sounds useful or like issues we should create or whatever. And I am going to do the boring thing of showing you walls of text while I talk, just so y'all can see the same thing I'm speaking to. So in the meeting notes here, I've linked to the issue that says all release blocking CI jobs need to run in community infrastructure. You can see basically all of them are done except for the build job and then this periodic Bazel build job. Sort of in light of Ben's KEP to kind of remove the Bazel stuff, my goal would be to, or my suggestion would be to at least start by moving the Bazel stuff, the Bazel related jobs, to the release informing dashboard instead of the release blocking dashboard. That then allows us to focus just on the existing build job that is used to produce the same release artifacts that are released by Kubernetes. So the last comment I have in the issue here shows the test that we're using to log the, okay, Ben.
Your screen is like frozen white. We're not receiving video of what you're trying to share.
Cool. All right, I will stop sharing and try again, but maybe Safari is just being annoying. I'll try one more time. Otherwise, I guess you'll just have to hear me talk to it. All right, you seeing it now?
Now I actually just see black. Before I could at least see the browser Chrome.
Awesome. All right. I will have to test out my setup before the meeting. So I will instead link the issue in chat, but it's linked in the docs. So that's the umbrella issue. The two remaining, you heard what I said. The very sort of comment at the very bottom there is the test we're using to keep track of which jobs have not been migrated over to community infrastructure just yet. It's basically just the periodic Bazel build job, which I think should be release informing. And then it is the CI Kubernetes build jobs that are putting artifacts into the Kubernetes release dev bucket, which is owned by google.com. And things that live outside of google.com are not allowed to write to that bucket. So Arnaud has been a huge help in setting up a bunch of jobs on community infra that write to the Kate's release dev bucket, which is owned by the community. So the path forward here is to ensure that all of our release blocking jobs and all of our merge blocking jobs, I think it's mostly the release blocking jobs. So the periodics that download pre-built binaries should be downloading them from the community owned bucket. Once we've done that, I think we can safely call this done. Does that make sense? Is this something that, does anybody want to help out with this? Okay. I will ping the release CI signal channel, and Arnaud, I'd love to have your continued help in pushing this forward. It would be greatly appreciated. So I think that this is the work necessary to close out the CI policy stuff. Now, there's kind of broader work to make sure that we stop using Kubernetes release dev and the images that KubeADM uses that also live in a google.com owned project called Kubernetes CI images. I want to make sure that eventually all jobs use community owned and hosted artifacts. And then sort of as a next step, I want to ensure that all sort of hard-coded mentions in the various repos around Kubernetes stop referring to Kubernetes release dev and start referring to Kate's release dev. So that last part, since it spans a bunch of projects, may ultimately need to be a KEP, which I don't think I'm going to have time to land prior to enhancements freeze today. But we will be able to close this out. And we can say, hooray, all Kubernetes jobs involved in creating Kubernetes run on the community and pull from community hosted artifacts. And then we can finally close out what we've been doing since August.
Hey, so, but what's the task? Is just to move the registry where the job is storing the artifacts, or are there more things involved?
It's basically updating a number of job configs to pull from Kate's release dev instead of Kubernetes release dev. So let me.
Okay. I will check all the SIG network ones. I thought there was something more involved, but
so I'm linking to comments that sort of describe the mechanics in more detail.
okay.
We added a flag to kubetest and I believe kubetest 2 to describe like which bucket you want to be pulling your releases from. And so my suggestion was that we explicitly specify the Kate's release dev bucket for a couple jobs. And then when we are satisfied that that works for those jobs, we can flip the default of that flag so that if you don't explicitly list that flag, you will be pulling from Kate's release dev. And that should capture most of the jobs that use kubetest or kubetest 2, leaving only the Bootstrap jobs that pull from the old bucket. And based on Amit's work, none of the none of the old Bootstrap jobs will be involved in release blocking or merge blocking. Does that answer your question?
Well, there's a lot of. I will try to practice with the SIG network one. So Ricardo and other guys asked me to help. So we try to organize this.
Okay.
And if we are able to move forward with that,
Yeah.
will ask if we can do more things on other areas. Okay.
Thank you for helping out with the SIG network stuff. It's really appreciated. Any other questions on that?
I have a question about the specific job, the CI kits build. Do we have to do something about that, or we just have to wait the cap?
Yeah, so my proposal there would be to take the CI Kubernetes build job that pushes to google.com to Kubernetes release dev and move that to the release informing dashboard. And so that's no longer a release blocking job. And then we can sort of define a deprecation window that is relevant to continue having that job produce new CI builds at the old location. We may eventually want to do something like sync the builds from the community location to the old Google location. But I feel like that is orthogonal to closing out the CI policy work.
Okay.
Okay, how are we doing on time? We have tons of time. Awesome. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, I'm a little bummed I can't share my screen, is the list of things that went well and could have gone better when renaming the default branch of the Kubernetes org repo. This sort of overlaps, so this is me speaking as a member of the GitHub admin subproject as part of SIG Contrib-X, but this is also very relevant to the interests of the naming working group. Basically, GitHub now provides a button that you can click that will rename the branch in the default branch in your repository. And it looks really scary in Slack because basically it looks like the person who clicks the button deletes the master branch and then immediately creates a new branch with your name. So we're using main as our default branch name. And so I have appreciated the flashing alarm emojis when people notice that happen. But then GitHub will automatically retarget all open PRs and make sure that they are targeted at the main branch. What that looks like to Prow at the moment is that all open PRs have suddenly been updated. And so Prow will go off and re-trigger all of the jobs for all of those PRs. This would be horrible for Kubernetes, since it has, I don't know, last I checked, like 970 open PRs, and then multiply that by, let's call it ballpark 10 jobs for each PR. We don't currently have the capacity to handle a spike of 9,700 jobs all running at once. Say nothing of the fact that like some of those jobs spin up 100 node clusters and whatnot. So I feel like collectively we need to figure out a way to have Prow not do that. We currently have a max concurrency setting that you can set on a per job basis. So for example, the 100 node cluster jobs, the scalability pre-submit, we can only have 12 of those running at a time. That's great, but that's on a per job level. It's not for all jobs that Prow triggers at once. Then I also kind of have the sneaking suspicion if we were to suddenly trigger 970 PRs all at once, like the first 12 of those would have their jobs run and pass. Maybe the next 12 would have their jobs run and pass. And then probably everything after that would get do timeout. And so you'd see the little status context on the pull request look like, you know, pod pending timeout or something like that. I have heard that other CI systems do not interpret a branch rename as a reason to re-trigger all jobs. So presumably there is something that can be done to Prow to ensure that we don't re-trigger everything. That might be, we need to listen to a different version of the GitHub API than we are. I don't think that's quite it. Or maybe we could be smarter about when, whether we consider a PR's, excuse me, whether we consider a PR's base branch to have actually changed and whether we actually need to re-trigger. So that's one thing. The other kind of annoying thing is all of our periodic jobs that run on the release blocking dashboard, stuff like that. They have the branch name hard-coded in their configuration, which means you kind of have to synchronize when do I push the button to rename branches and when do I update the job configurations to use the new branch names. I think ideally the least disruptive thing would be if we could figure out a way to have the jobs express, I don't care what the branch name is, I just want to check out and run using the repo's default branch. That is almost certainly what every single job means when they use the term master.
I'm not sure that's actually going to work, because so a lot of repos, what you have is you either have jobs that don't care because they don't have branches, or something like Kubernetes, you have jobs that are like, this is the pre-submit for only that branch. And then there's other jobs that run on the release branches that are different. So we match by regex that like we want to be that one specifically. So I think the thing you can do instead is update it to target either of those names. So I'm pretty sure it's already including by regex.
Correct. You can do that for pre-submits and post-submits. I have done that. That works. So that gets to, like, my goal is you open up one PR and then you can click the button. And then it doesn't matter like when you go back and like clean up configs or whatever. So having pre-submits and post-submits both trigger on either master or main works. It's great. It also works for the milestone applier. It also works for, what was the other thing? Branch protector, if you explicitly rename branches. The website repo is the only one that does that. It's the periodics, which is by job config volume, like we define way more periodics than we do pre-submits or post-submits. So both Podutils based jobs and Bootstrap based jobs could benefit from modifying Bootstrap and modifying Podutils to not require an explicit designation of the branch. In Podutils case, you have to specify a branch name right now. I'd love to be able to say, if the branch name isn't specified, use whatever the remote repo's default branch is. There's a really simple git command you can use to do this. If you wanted to do it at the pod level, or perhaps there's a way we could have Prow interact with GitHub's API when it's triggering a pull request to do the same thing. With Bootstrap, it does actually allow you to specify, just check out the repo, just check out this repo, and you don't specify the branch, but Bootstrap currently defaults to master if you don't set that. So again, with Bootstrap, it would be ideal if we could give it logic to, I don't know, either default to main or default to whatever the remote repo's branch is. both of these would hugely help out migration and greatly simplify the changes we need. That was pretty much everything that I ran into. I've done this migration for the Kubernetes org repo and the Kubernetes K8s.io repo, which both had under 20 PRs. So the spike of all jobs being triggered simultaneously was not that bad. If you own a repo that sort of fits those criteria and you want to work on this, talk to me or like come talk to us in the GitHub management Slack channel, and we'll sort of sign you up to trial this for your repo. At the moment, I feel like until we solve these issues, it is not feasible to do this for the Kubernetes repo. So I don't anticipate attempting to do this for the current release cycle. But it would be fantastic if we could fix these in time to do this for the 122 release cycle. I think that's all I had to say about that. Any comments or questions?
I just checked real quick. The part about should we be able to do this in Proud, GitHub does have an API we can check to get the default branch. So I think worst case, we should just be able to update Podutils to like fetch that if you didn't specify. And I think we should do that.
Okay. I have run out of things to talk about. If you all are willing to bear with me for a couple minutes, I just want to kind of ask a meta question. I kind of feel like over the past couple of months, these meetings have mostly been me talking to a mostly silent audience, which gives me concern that you all don't find this informative or interesting. I mean, you're showing up, which is definitely one signal, but I kind of want to understand how we could work to make this space something where you're more willing to ask questions or bring issues. Because I feel like watching me talk for 30 minutes straight is pretty boring. He says to a mostly silent audience.
Well, for me, this is mostly an informal meeting. So I kind of like that information flow. I just try to see what's going on, basically. Also mostly interested in the PROW stuff. I'm not sure, like most of the things, I don't really have an input that are not related to PROW, possibly. So that's why I'm mostly silent on those.
Thank you, Daniel. Like, it's certainly not my intent to call people out. I recognize that not everybody's comfortable showing their face on screen. Not everybody participates in meetings or communicates the same way. So maybe like showing up and talking a bunch is not your jam, which is cool. Which kind of leads me to the other meta question I had that Ben probably cares more about. If all I'm doing is showing up and talking, and these are mostly informational blasts, could this meeting be an email? Something like
Yes,
that.
Aaron, it could be an email. Actually, I have a little bit of a different idea. I've been in discussion with SIG Contribex about this. They first started with doing asynchronous meetings through Slack by having a thread for each topic. I'm not sure that particular approach panned out the best, but I'm interested in doing something similar and instead refocusing this meeting on sort of the like people to people part. I think because it is just like one or two of us talking, it doesn't do a whole lot for having a sense of community. And I think that's the actual useful, valuable part of like hopping on a video call. for collaborating with our global community on topics like, should we remove this build system? I think we should use asynchronous discussion. So I'm actually planning to file a proposal later about GitHub discussions are now a thing. I'm wondering if we can make a like Kubernetes /SIG testing repo similar to Kubernetes /SIG release and host GitHub discussions there for topics that otherwise would have been just one of us talking this meeting. And I'm kind of hoping that people will be more likely to comment on what is sort of a like GitHub issue or something instead of in this very particular video meeting. And maybe we can try to repurpose the video meeting for a bit more of like meet and greet and that sort of thing.
I like the idea.
Yeah, I mean, not to keep talking, but to echo Ben's sentiment, I personally get a lot more. I am an introvert, so group stuff doesn't usually work well with me, but I do find I get a lot out of connecting with people as human beings. And so that's more the satisfaction I derive from this meeting is getting to see you all here every 2 weeks and catching up and stuff. Personally, I feel like in the whatever current pandemic reality in which we all live, I feel like it is especially important to remember that there are humans on the other end of the screen. But when it comes to like making decisions and collaborating, I want to make sure that we are friendly to people who can't make this particular meeting in this particular time slot and stuff. Selfishly, I am a terribly slow writer. So if the idea is to turn this into email blasts or something of that nature, I feel like it will take me more time than the duration of this meeting to effectively write something that is not too wordy and easily digestible. It's a lot easier for me to ramble, but I think I agree with most of what Ben said. Like, and I think the steering committee talked about this 2 meetings ago too. So for those of you who are showing up here, I especially value your opinion on like why you're showing up and like what you want this meeting to be, how we can make it a better space for you.
From my side, I usually in this meeting say nothing. I just gather information, and I find the interactive discussion much more useful than just another email. Because emails, I think we all have enough of those. So I don't think there is no value in this. Just hearing you raise the topics and getting some feedback, even though it's not a wordy discussion on every topic, I do think there's value in this for the community, especially if you are still in need of new information. My 5 cents.
Thanks. Yeah. So I'll also add 2 comments, Aaron. So this was discussed with steering, and I believe currently they're looking into recommending this sort of thing for the same sort of like accessibility and like time zone concerns and things. I believe the approach that Contravex is taking currently is to alternate a bit. So like you're still having video meetings, but de-emphasizing them a bit from things like decision making and more on like circulating ideas, getting to check in with each other, that sort of thing.
Sure. And in that sense, I guess I do feel like that's kind of what this meeting has been, though maybe it's less circulating and more me just rambling about them, or you and Amit, which is super appreciated. But yeah, I feel like early on, I tried to title this meeting the SIG testing office hours to sort of encourage more of that atmosphere of like, hey, let's chat. Why not? Let's, you know, if you value sort of the spontaneity of in-person discussion, we're here for that. So I'm happy to make this that kind of space. But if it felt to me like when I sort of titled the meeting office hours, people were like, oh, it's just office hours. I don't care about that. I'm not going to show up.
Yeah, I think the problem is we've been trying to fill it with like sort of relying on, oh, we'll just get input from this meeting, and it's maybe less the meeting's problem and more the like getting ideas circulated and commented on outside of the meeting, leading to like we're attempting to do that in the middle of the meeting. I think it's also harder for something like a KEP to like usefully comment on it if you haven't seen it ahead of time, because they're just so wordy with the KEP template. For example, I also have some concern that if we like renamed it back to office hours, that probably people just wouldn't show up. But on the other hand, if like no one's interested in that, then like maybe it isn't valuable.
Why not try it out with the office hours and this async kind of meeting?
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like per the comment about making decisions in an async manner, I don't want to make a decision here, but I do think we'll take this into consideration and email out something for us to make a decision. But I like the idea too. I don't know. My gut kind of tells me keep the meeting name, but send out a communication that's pretty explicit about, hey, we're sort of trying to retool or repurpose, and here's what's going on. Anyway, I don't know if trying to leave enough space for other people if they want to say anything. But if you all feel like you don't want to say anything, that's totally cool. Super happy to give y'all 8 minutes of your lives back. Okay. Sounds like we're good. Yeah, and I said it before, but I super appreciate all of you. You've all done great stuff to help move this project forward. And I look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks, Aaron. Cheers.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.